Chapter 4 of Magnetism. Magnetism was for a long time confounded with hypnotism, and even today, many consider the terms synonymous. Careful research of recent years has, however, sufficiently established the distinction between the two sciences, though their points of contact are many. Either of them, for instance, can be employed to produce artificial sleep, and I have myself in many cases begun with hypnotism and ended with magnetism. Before beginning the study of magnetism, we must understand its character and have some proof of its existence. Littré defines it as a practical system for producing in the human body unusual phenomena, allied to those produced by a magnet. But if he had compiled his dictionary at the present time, he would undoubtedly have given the science a simpler and more precise definition. In a word, we may define magnetism as the personal action, either psychic or physiological, exerted by man on man. And we attribute this action to a fluid which emanates from the human body, which is more or less active in every one of us. This fluid is variously called the vital principle, the neural force, animal magnetism, the magnetic fluid, the nervous fluid, and the magnetic agent. The existence of this fluid has been disputed, and perhaps even now, not everyone is convinced of its reality. The proofs of its existence, which we shall bring forward, will all be drawn from the experience of specialists. Monsieur Bourac, in his work La Psychologie Inconnue, Paris, 1907, writes thus: if we are denied the right to admit the existence of a force in nature, radiating from the nervous system, still unknown but undoubtedly analogous to the forces of electricity and magnetism, on the pretext that this force has no definite place in scientific theory, we are entitled to reply, with Laplace, that it is hardly philosophic to dispute the existence of magnetic phenomena, merely because they are inexplicable to the present state of our knowledge. Dr. Van Velsen, in his Hypnotism, Suggestion, and Psychotherapy, Brussels, 1912, observes that it would be indeed strange if a galvanic battery could send out an electric fluid or vibration, while our body, so infinitely complex, the reservoir of so many reactions, had no corresponding capacities. Our being is not limited by the surface of our bodies. Dr. Mouton thus expresses his opinion on the same subject. Magnetic somnambulism has only a remote connection with hypnotic somnambulism. Contrary to the assertions of 9/10 of the hypnotizers and suggesters, we maintain that there is a transmissible agent at work, and that it is this which produces the profounder stages of hypnosis. Dr. Mouton is not content with affirming the existence of this agent. He gives proofs of its existence, many of them derived from personal experience and from the experience of his predecessors, notably Dupotet. Monsieur Bourac, of whom I have already spoken, is among those who have given the most profound study to this question. In an essay contributed to La Nouvelle Revue in October 1895, he recounts some experiments which he himself made. He says, I had in my service for 6 months a lad of 15 named Jean M., a native of the Pyrenees of extreme hypnotic sensibility. I had but to place my open hand behind his elbow or on any part whatever of his body to produce at once an agitated movement, and that, so far as I could judge, without his having any knowledge of what I had done. On some occasions, indeed, he had his back to me and was occupied in reading or talking. Several times, when he was in a normal sleep, my hand held above his body would produce a movement in the direction of the hand, a rising and falling of the flesh, as though the hand had touched and agitated it. This was perhaps an instance rather of simple hyperesthesia than of magnetic influence. But that theory appears more difficult to maintain in the face of the following strange circumstance, which I transcribe from my notes. One Sunday afternoon in January 1893, I had returned home after a short absence about 3 in the afternoon, and heard that Jean, having finished his work and feeling weary, had gone to lie down. The door of his room was open, and without entering it, I looked in on him. He was lying on his bed, with his head turned away from the door, his arms crossed on his breast, and his legs crossed over one another, with the feet hanging a little way out of the bed. I had been present the evening before at a discussion on the reality of magnetic action, and it occurred to me to make an experiment. Still standing on the landing, outside the door, about 3 yards away, I stretched out my right hand in the direction of the boy's feet, and at about the same height from the ground as they were. After 1 or 2 minutes, I slowly raised his hand, and to my astonishment saw the feet of the sleeper rise, both together, into the air, following the ascending movement of my hand. 3 times I repeated the experiment, and 3 times the phenomenon was reproduced. In my amazement, I called my wife, requesting her to make as little noise as possible. But the sleeper had not stirred. Again, the feet rose 2 or 3 times, attracted by and directed by my hand. "Try," whispered Madame B. to me, "to do it by willpower." Accordingly, I fixed my eyes on the sleeper's feet and then slowly raised my eyes. The feet followed the direction of my gaze, rising, pausing, and falling exactly as my eyes did. Monsieur Barak, in his valuable work La Psychologie Inconnue, to which we have already alluded, claims to have discovered the origin and characteristics of the fluid emanating from the human organism. Dr. Jouard has, like so many others, questioned whether this force really does emanate from one human body and communicate itself to another. He has in the end come to an affirmative conclusion and attempted to construct an instrument which will serve experimentally to test and to weigh the force in question. This instrument, known as the stenometer, or measurer of strength, consists of a needle enclosed in a glass globe. When the hand approaches this, there can be detected, after the lapse of some minutes, a very decided movement of attraction on the part of the needle, the degree of the movement often varying with the temperament of the owner of the hand. Dr. Jouard very rightly observes that, since the needle moves, there must be some force acting upon it. We know only of 4 forces or vibrations capable of exerting influence at a distance, namely sound, heat, light, and electricity. And Dr. Dubor proves by the most exact experiments that none of these four is operative on his stenometer. Therefore, he infers that the human body possesses a force peculiar to itself, of the nature of which he is ignorant. He draws the following conclusions. 1. Our experience shows the existence of a force which apparently emanates from the nervous system and which is capable of operating at a distance. 2. There is a possibility that this force is capable of being stored up in certain bodies. 3. Steel, iron, and cotton are incapable of containing it. 4. Wood, water, when bottled, cloth, and pasteboard are capable of containing it. 5. Bodies become charged with this force in proportion to the force exercised by the agent of production. That is to say, persons who exercise less force by means of the hand communicate less of it to the conducting body. One interesting detail about the stenometer is its power of determining the degree of gravity of nervous diseases. In the different manifestations of hysteria, the displacement of the equilibrium of the force is proportionate to the existing nervous trouble, so that one can follow exactly the progress of the malady and the tendency towards cure, as they are recorded, so to speak, by the stenometer. Dr. Gaston D'Urville, who has given the subject of magnetism careful scientific study, and who, reserving the question of the origin of this mysterious force, is content, for the moment, with proving its existence, quotes this sentence from the works of Favre. If the influence of the hand can make itself felt on the human being, it must equally be able to do so on the human cell. And if on the human cell, then on living cells in general. As an example of cells living but without consciousness, D'Urville cites the microorganisms and vegetables. In experimenting on them, instead of on human subjects, we eliminate that greatest factor of error, suggestion. D'Urville commenced by studying the action of the human hand on cultures of the bacillus of typhoid. After many experiments, he came to the conclusion that the hand retards the growth of such microbes, and that it possesses in consequence a power comparable to the power exerted by the sun. If the human hand acts in this way with microbes, it must have a corresponding action on more highly evolved organisms, for instance vegetables. We know that Indian fakirs profess to be able to make plants grow up in their hands in the course of a few minutes, and Louis Jacoliot declares that they actually can do so. D'Urville, on the contrary, is skeptical, and I myself share his unbelief. We have a preference in France for serious and scientific experiment. At the Institute of General Psychology, Favre made some interesting experiments with garden cress, by which he established the fact that the human hand, held a certain distance away, influences germination and growth, and that the right hand has more influence than the left, except in the case of left-handed persons. Dr. Dubor continued these experiments, and he also came to the same conclusion, but he has, more recently, made another series of experiments which, in my judgment, are considerably more convincing. I am alluding to his experiments in mummification. At the time that he began these, Madame V. of Bordeaux, under the supervision of several doctors, who published their report of the proceedings in the Annals of Psychical Science, had already by the mere imposition of hands succeeded in desiccating such things as fish, oysters, pieces of meat, and oranges. The similar experiments of D'Urville were conducted on strictly scientific lines. In the January of 1913, Dr. Stoké of the Legal Medical Faculty sent to D'Urville the amputated hand of a man who had died of gas poisoning, with a warning that he must experiment on it as quickly as possible, as it had already been 15 days refrigerated in the morgue. Refrigerated bodies decompose, as we all know, very swiftly. So D'Urville began his experiment under no very favorable conditions. Nevertheless, he, with his two assistants, Madame Renaud and Monsieur Picot, began to magnetize the hand by making slow passes over it from the point of amputation to the tips of the fingers and at a distance of about 15 centimeters. Each of the three magnetizers thus magnetized the hand for about 3/4 of an hour each day for the first 6 days. After this, as the hand showed no signs of decomposition, the seances were of somewhat less duration, but the procedure was continued, and a committee of inquiry attended each day to make an official report on the state of the hand. We need not weary the reader by giving these formal daily reports in full. Suffice it to say that during the 2 months of the experiment, no slightest sign of decomposition appeared, and that at the end of the 2 months the hand was completely mummified. The desiccating process, says Dr. D'Urville, proceeded slowly. At first, the fingers and the point where amputation had taken place became dry, reddish, and rough. And then the palm and the back of the hand suffered the same changes. The weight of the hand diminished from 410 grams to 289 grams, and later to 264 grams. Today, April 18th, 1913, the aspect of the hand is altogether that of a mummy. Dr. D'Urville continued his experiments on 2 guinea pigs of the same age and weight. The livers of these were dried and then placed each in a little porcelain jar in the doctor's laboratory. The conditions for both of them were being exactly similar. Then one of these specimens was submitted to a process of magnetization, the seances taking place 3 or 4 times a day and lasting about 5 minutes. At the end of 28 days, the non-magnetized liver was absolutely putrefied, a liquid mass of corruption, while in the magnetized one, decomposition had been arrested, leaving the form intact, the odor only slightly sour and exhibiting no signs of mildew. As related at the Congress of Experimental Psychism, Monsieur Emile Magna has made similar experiments with the brains and hearts of small animals and has had similar results. At the same Congress, Monsieur Henri Sauce related a curious experiment of his own, which, though different in character, tends to prove the same point, the existence, namely, of a magnetic fluid in the human body. Monsieur Sauce takes a card which someone else has chosen from a pack, preferably new or but little used. He holds it for a few seconds in his hands and replaces it in the pack without having looked at it. The pack is then shuffled and given to a sensitive, who has no knowledge of the identity of the card which has been handled by the experimenter, but who, in going through the pack, is invariably able to pick out the right one. Monsieur Sauce does not hesitate to say that the card is made recognizable by the magnetic fluid with which it is impregnated, and that no other explanation, the possibility of fraud being guarded against, can be accepted. The existence of an unknown force resident in the human body and operating on living cells and organisms being sufficiently proved, we must go on to inquire into its origin and its composition. Without doubt, we are not as yet capable of penetrating into the heart of the mystery, but perhaps the solution has begun to dawn on us. D'Urville, in the work we have already cited, narrates an incident which seems to throw some light on the problem. On June 12, 1910, the doctor was making magnetic passes over a lady. The subject was wearing a black dress, and the doctor had his back to the light. Suddenly, in the semi-darkness which surrounded him, he observed a grayish vapor, like the fumes of a cigarette, issuing from the tips of his fingers, and with special clearness from the index and the middle fingers. Moreover, the index fingers of the two hands seemed to be united by a luminous arc or semicircle. Doubting the evidence of his own eyes, the doctor asked M.C., an engineer, to come and sit beside him and watch his hands. Soon M.C. exclaimed in astonishment that he perceived pale lights issuing from them, and with a gesture of his own hand, he described the arc uniting the two index fingers. Other persons, on the doctor's invitation, drew near and observed the same phenomenon. Then the room was darkened, and the doctor asked the persons present to keep silence and to write down what they saw. In the end, it was found that before the room was thus darkened, 9 out of the 18 persons present had observed the emanation from the index and middle fingers, as well as the luminous arc between the two indexes, while 8 of the remaining 9 saw the emanation, but without the luminous arc. In the darkness, 12 of the witnesses perceived nothing at all, and the remaining 6 perceived only very little. Dr. Maxwell, in his work Psychic Phenomena, gives almost identical evidence. He says that 7 or 8 persons out of every 10 will be able to see a grayish vapor emanating from the tips of the fingers and joining, as it were, one finger to another. One should be very careful not to tell people what they are expected to see, for that vitiates the experiment by introducing the element of suggestion and imagination. The recent discoveries made by Commandant Georges on the subject of radiation emitted by the human body ought greatly to assist in the solution of this problem. This clever experimenter informs us that he can actually demonstrate the action of this human electricity. I take an ordinary electric bulb and, holding it in one hand by its metal casing, rub it with the other, up and down, the whole length of its surface for about a minute in a dark room. The result is that the bulb is ignited and the interior of the glass is illuminated by its rays. This force, which is analogous to electricity and may be called electromagnetic, is the vital fluid, the radioactivity of animal bodies. Revue Mondiale, 1st July 1919. Georges, who had already proved by photography the existence of human radiations, has in this experiment taken a further important step by proving the electric nature of the human magnetic fluid. As he observes, this power of radiation does not exist equally in everyone, and is possessed by some persons in a higher degree than others. Granted the existence of this force, it would seem only natural that the artificial sleep induced by its means should differ, in some particulars, from the trance induced by gazing fixedly at the subject, that is to say, by ordinary methods of hypnotizing. These differences are very noticeable in some cases, though difficult to note in others. Monsieur Jagot, a professional magnetizer, thus summarizes them in his treatise on magnetism, hypnotism, and suggestion. In somnambulism induced by magnetism, the subject is conscious only of the magnetizer, even when the latter is far away. In hypnotic somnambulism, the subject communicates with all the persons present in spite of suggestions which may be made to him to attend only to the hypnotizer. In the former case, the subject is often in a state of lucidity, that is, he can apprehend things of which in his waking state he has no knowledge. For instance, the causes of certain diseases, the remedies, and so on. In the second case, nothing of the kind takes place, memory and judgment being annihilated. Lucidity, which is the result of magnetism, occasionally includes prevision of future events. This phenomenon is never observed in the hypnotic sleep. A magnetized somnambulist retains freedom of will, discusses and reasons with more intelligence than in the waking state. He also retains his conscience unimpaired and is not susceptible to any suggestion which would outrage the moral sense. A hypnotic somnambulist is incapable of thinking or acting freely and can only obey passively the injunctions of the operator. The following tables indicate the difference which, according to Monsieur Emile Magnat, exists between the magnetic and the hypnotic sleep. Magnetic sleep. No anesthesia nor analgesia. Communication only with the magnetizer. Suggestions only accepted when in agreement with the subject's own judgment. Intellect highly developed. Suggestibility tending to lessen and to disappear, psychic manifestations, hypnotic sleep, complete anesthesia, communication with everyone present, intellect enfeebled, suggestibility increased, no psychic manifestations. It is obvious that the magnetic method of inducing trance is greatly superior to the hypnotic method, but many more subjects are open to hypnotism than to magnetism. For this reason, in certain cases, the operator is obliged to begin by hypnotizing the subject and later to proceed with the magnetic method. The power of magnetism is best shown in producing the profound states of hypnosis and in obtaining those highly interesting phenomena of which we shall speak later on.